Hello everyone, what is up? Welcome back to another episode of Killer Instinct, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah and I am your host of Killer Instinct. Before we get started, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday and you are not going to want to miss it. We also upload the video version onto YouTube on Wednesdays as well, so make sure you are subscribed. Now, you guys, happy July. We are now in the beginning of a new month, which if you have been following along, you know very well what that means. It means that we are now on to a new true crime category. If you haven't been following along, we have been dedicating each month to a new true crime category. So January, we did unsolved cases. Last month was fatal friendships. We've done celebrity cases. We've done serial killers. We've done killer couples. We have gone over a lot this year, and I'm very excited to say that for the month of July, we are going to be covering sinister stalkers. I am very intrigued by these types of cases, and I know you guys are as well. If you want to be a part of picking out any of the future cases that we do, especially the ones that are covered in these types of categories, or want a say in the types of categories that we cover, make sure you go ahead and follow the Killer Instinct Instagram. I'm always asking you guys on there for your opinions, what categories you want to see. I'm running polls there a lot, so make sure you go follow that. It's always linked in the description. It is just at Killer Instinct Podcast. But as you guys can tell by the title of today's episode, today we have a case that definitely falls under the sinister stalker category. Today we are talking about the brutal murder of Kendra Hatcher. I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to give anything away, but with that being said, let's jump right on into it today. Kendra Hatcher was born on February 3rd, 1980 in Springfield, Illinois, to her parents, Reagan and Bonnie. Kendra graduated from DePaul University, where she was a part of the sorority Kappa Alpha Theta. While there, she studied dentistry and ended up getting married. However, that marriage resulted in divorce, and in 2010, Kendra moved to the Dallas area for a fresh start and began working at a pediatric dental office. Kendra was described as your girl next door. She was incredibly kind, loving, and outgoing. She was always wanting to help others. Growing up, she was the captain of the cheerleading team, and she graduated second in her high school class. She was a devoted Christian, and her faith was very important to her. She also loved yoga, being outdoors, traveling, and being with her friends. She also really loved kids. This is something that made her want to go into pediatric dentistry specifically. And she also moved to Dallas because Kendra was bilingual and she wanted to be able to work in the Hispanic community. That was something that was very important to her. Now, while working in Dallas, Kendra was living at an apartment complex that was called Gables Park 17. This is a luxurious high-rise building in a nice area of town. So Kendra had a lot of exciting things happening in her life. She had a great job. She was living in a great apartment in a great area of town. And another area of her life that was thriving was her love life. Kendra began dating a man named Ricky Paniagua. Ricky was a physician, and the two of them met on a dating app, and immediately they were head over heels for each other. And we will get more into her relationship with Ricky in a little bit. But for right now, I want to jump to the night of September 2nd, 2015. On the specific night, there was a resident of Gables 17, so the same complex that Kendra lived in. Now, this resident called 911 when he found a woman lying on the ground in the parking garage of the complex, and the woman was lying in a pool of blood and had appeared to be shot. And when first responders arrived to the scene, they found Kendra Hatcher lying underneath the open driver's side door of her car. She was lying on the ground under that driver's side door and again in a pool of her own blood. Medical examiners found that Kendra had been shot in the back of the head with an exit wound under her chin. The bullet was said to have severed her spinal cord, and she died instantly after being shot. It was also discovered that Kendra had gunshot residue on the back of her hands, leaving authorities to believe that her hands were behind her head when she was shot. Now, the lead detective on this case was a man named Eric Barnes, and when he got a call that there had been a homicide that night, he was surprised to hear that the homicide had occurred in Uptown. Now, Uptown of Dallas is definitely known to be more of an upper class area. It was where the nicer apartments were. It was where the nicer restaurants were, the nicer shops were. There was typically very little violent crime happening in that area. All in all, it was a generally upscale community. Now, when Eric Barnes arrived to the scene, he was informed that Kendra's purse and wallet had been stolen, which at first led everyone on the scene to believe that this could have been a robbery gone wrong. Now, at this point in the investigation, police decided to look at the security camera footage that came from the complex parking garage. And when they did that, they noticed that there was an unfamiliar vehicle. This vehicle was a black Jeep Cherokee. And after entering the garage, the Jeep was circling for several minutes until 4 minutes later, the Jeep followed another car into the tenant parking garage. You guys know how in some apartment complex you have visitor parking and then you have resident parking. And a lot of times that resident parking is divided by a separate gate, and you can only get into that gate if you are a resident. And what police were noticing when looking at the security camera footage is that it appeared that the Jeep Cherokee had waited for another resident to open that gate before they drove through themselves and parked in a resident parking spot. So once the Jeep was in the resident parking lot, police were able to see that it waited there until 7:42 p.m. when Kendra Hatcher's car drove through that resident parking garage. Kendra's car parked in its designated parking lot, and that is when police noticed someone get out of the vehicle, that Jeep Cherokee, and walk over to Kendra's car. Immediately after that Jeep pulled out of its spot, the person who had originally gotten out of the car is seen walking back to the car, hopping inside of it, and the Jeep drives off. Now, the footage itself, this security camera footage, it is quite grainy, so it's not able to make out necessarily the identities of the people that were involved in this. However, this at least gave police a sequence of events and a timeline to know when this happened. Now, after this, police blasted that Jeep Cherokee all across the media, asking for the public's help to identify that car or any of the occupants that could have been inside of it. Now, when that happened, that is when police got a call from a man named Jose Ortiz. Now, when Jose called police, he claimed that he did in fact recognize the car from the picture, and that was because the car in the picture was Jose's personal car. Now, Jose was very confused, as you can imagine, as to why his car was being blasted all over the media and towards the public, but he continued to tell police that he was a mechanic and he was working on a friend's car that was having some car troubles. Now, this specific friend of his needed to be able to get to work, and so he actually swapped cars with her for the day. That way she would be able to get to and from work while he worked on her car. Now, this specific friend who Jose loaned his car to was named Brenda Delgado. Jose claimed that when Brenda came to drop off her car and pick up his car, she was not alone and that she was with another friend of hers named Crystal Cortez. Now, the initial plan was for Brenda to have the car for the day and then bring it back to Jose after she completed her shift at work. However, instead, Brenda ended up calling him. And again, this is all on September 2nd, 2015, the day of the murder. Brenda ended up calling Jose and asked him to meet her at a local Chili's restaurant instead. She wanted that to be the place where they could exchange cars. However, when Jose got there, he was surprised that Brenda was there, but Crystal was not there and his car was also not there either. Brenda told Jose that Crystal had his car and him and Brenda got some dinner at Chili's before leaving at 9 p.m. He claimed that Brenda didn't really give him a proper explanation explanation as to why Crystal still had his car, but they were friends. He didn't think too much of it, and the two of them went into Chili's and had dinner together. After Chili's is when Brenda called Krista off of Jose's phone and told her to meet them at Jose's house so that they could exchange cars, which they did. So essentially what Jose is saying is that what was supposed to be a quick exchange, just a simple favor helping out a friend, turned into a more long, confusing, strenuous day for him. So that is what Jose told police. And so they took in that information. And shortly after, police got a second phone call from a man named Ricky Paniagua. Now, as we remember, Ricky is Kendra's ex-boyfriend. And when Ricky called police, he told them that he recognized the girl in the car because according to him, it looked a lot like his ex-girlfriend, Brenda Delgado. So now police have two connections to Brenda Delgado. They have the ex-boyfriend, which is Ricky, and they have Jose, who offered his car to Brenda during that specific day of September 2nd, 2015. So now the police have two people connecting Brenda Delgado to this car. They decided that obviously they wanted to speak to Brenda. So they bring her down to the police station 2 days after the murder on September 4th, 2015. Now, before we get into what the conversation was between Brenda and police, I want to take a moment and tell you about who Brenda Delgado is. Brenda Delgado was born on June 18th, 1982 to her parents, Louis and Maria Delgado. Now, times were tough in Brenda's family growing up, and they struggled to make ends meet, but people knew Brenda to be a very hard worker. She was very motivated, and she was a great student, and she worked multiple part-time jobs in order for her to make her way through her education. Brenda graduated and went on to work as a dental assistant in the year of 2000 and then met Ricky in August of 2012. Now, 3 months after Ricky and Brenda started dating, Brenda ended up moving into Ricky's apartment with him. The two dated for about 2.5-3 years with one specific break in between. Now, other than that one break, Brenda and Ricky were known to be inseparable. Ricky said that he gave Brenda a promise ring, and Brenda thought that she was going to be spending the rest of her life with Ricky. Anyone who knew Brenda claimed that Brenda was head over heels for Ricky. She had a certain obsession with Ricky, and she couldn't imagine what life was going to be like without him. But unfortunately for Brenda, 3 years later, that thought became a reality when in February of 2015, Ricky told Brenda that he wanted to end their relationship. And Brenda took this breakup very, very hard. As I've said, Brenda could not fathom the thought of not being with Ricky. And so after the breakup, she continued to reach out, calling and texting him. And Ricky thought that the two had maintained a great platonic friendship after the breakup. However, people on Brenda's side of the fence claimed that there was nothing amicable about this breakup at all, and that Brenda just went along with it, thinking that the two of them would end up back together. However, for Ricky, he was really moving on. He was moving on with his life. He was moving on in the dating scene and putting himself back out there. Now, because of Brenda's infatuation with Ricky and her relationship with Ricky, you can imagine that Brenda was less than thrilled when she found out that Ricky was dating a new woman that he met in May of 2015, and that woman was Kendra Hatcher. Kendra and Ricky had met, like I said earlier, on a dating app in the summer of 2015, and the two spent their summer going out on dates and getting to know each other better, and they really gravitated towards each other. They got along really well, and they seemed like a great fit. Both of them were extremely happy in this new relationship, and they were also very public about their relationship. They were posting pictures of the two of them all over Facebook and their social medias, and they definitely saw a future together. The two of them had even started talking about creating a wedding fund. So it's safe to say that the relationship between Ricky and Kendra was off to the races. Things were going great for them all up until Kendra was murdered in September of 2015. But now let's go back and talk about what happened when police spoke to Brenda on September 4th. Now, police stated, and Eric Barnes specifically when talking about this case stated that typically when talking to a potential suspect, oftentimes people are closed off or they're not super talkative. They don't want to give up a lot of information. They're not very conversational. However, Brenda Delgado was the opposite. Brenda was a chatty Cathy when she sat down in this chair to talk to Eric Barnes. She was talkative, very personable. She was trying to make conversation, trying to talk to Eric Barnes about the bracelet that he was wearing. She was definitely trying to grow a personal relationship with Eric Barnes. Now, once Eric Barnes and Brenda got down to the actual investigation, police told Brenda that her name had come up in the murder of Kendra Hatcher. And Brenda told police that she was incredibly surprised by this because, according to her, she didn't even know who Kendra was. Now, police brought in a picture of Kendra to show Brenda, but still, Brenda was adamant on the fact that she didn't know Kendra Hatcher. Now, Brenda also told police that she had an alibi. She claimed that she was studying in the library all day on the 2nd of September and then went to Chili's with Jose later that night, and she even had the receipt to prove it. Brenda showed this receipt to authorities, and when looking at it, authorities were slightly taken aback because on the receipt, the timestamp for this receipt really did show that during the time of the murder, because again, police had those timestamps from the surveillance footage, Brenda Delgado was at Chili's. So there was definitely something going on here, and police needed to figure out what it was. Now, when talking to police, Brenda was very quick to say that she was not the only person who had access to Jose Ortiz's car that night. She claimed that her friend, Crystal Cortez, was the one who was driving the car. Now, again, Brenda was almost a little bit too quick to give up Crystal to authorities, but police knew that now they needed to speak to Crystal. So now police bring in Crystal Cortez, and pretty automatically and without hesitation, Crystal confesses to being the one driving the getaway car, the black Jeep, on the night of Kendra Hatcher's murder. And initially, she's throwing around a bunch of different stories. She claims at first that there was a masked gunman who jumped in the car and hijacked it and pointed a gun at her and forced her to drive to this parking lot. But that story didn't really make a lot of sense because there was nothing really to back it up. And along with that, Crystal was seen in the car alone at certain points, so it wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense. So that was one of the stories she told, and she kind of kept going in circles. She kept snowballing and digging herself deeper and deeper into a hole before ultimately she confessed to what she said was the truth, which was that Brenda Delgado hired Crystal Cortez to steal Kendra's purse and ID for $500. Now, police knew that there was a lot of missing pieces to this puzzle, but at least they were getting somewhere. And at least now the story was starting to make a little bit more sense because when police were talking to Crystal, they knew that Crystal did not have any true motive other than trying to help out a friend to kill Kendra Hatcher because there was no personal connection between Crystal Cortez and Kendra Hatcher. There was a mutual between the two, which was Brenda Delgado. So now the pieces of the puzzle are slowly starting to come together, and while police don't have all of the answers, they had enough information to go ahead and arrest Crystal Cortez, which they did. Now, after arresting Crystal, police then go back to Brenda, and again, Brenda is not budging. She insists to police that she did not know Kendra and that she had no motive. Now, again, she really wasn't budging on her story at all, and since police did not have enough to make an arrest in regards to the murder, they were able to arrest Brenda for unpaid traffic tickets. That is how they arrested her. However, unfortunately, the prisons were overoccupied at the time, and she was released only 48 hours later and quickly very, very quickly fled to Mexico, where she was a citizen. Now, immediately after Brenda fled the country, she was added to the FBI's most wanted fugitive list, the top 10 most wanted fugitives list, might I add. And just to give you some context, there have only been 11 women in American history that have been added to the top 10 most wanted list, and Brenda Delgado was one of those women. Now, while Brenda was on the run, Eric Barnes, the lead detective, shifted his focus in trying to figure out who the gunman was, who the person who actually killed Kendra Hatcher, who shot the gun that killed Kendra. That is what they were trying to figure out now. And so in order to do that, police started looking into the phone records of both Crystal and Brenda. And when doing that, that is when they found a common denominator. They found a common phone number that both of the women had been sending and receiving phone calls from. Now, obviously, police could not confront Brenda about this because Brenda was on the run, but they were able to confront Crystal, and she admitted that the number that police were seeing was in fact the shooter who killed Kendra, and that his name was Christopher Love. Now, Christopher Love had minor drug charges on his record before, but there was nothing to the extent of murder. So at this time, police brought him in for questioning, and he was adamant that he had nothing to do with Kendra's death. He claimed many times that he didn't know Kendra and that he didn't even own a gun. But this was easily disproven when police got a hold of Christopher's car, and they also got a search dog, and this search dog discovered a gun underneath the passenger seat of the car. Now, when police confronted Christopher with this information, he claimed that he had initially lied and that the gun was in fact his, and then he was arrested and charged with the murder of Kendra Hatcher. Now, you might be wondering, how on earth did Christopher Love get involved in this? And we're going to talk about it. So Christopher told police that he was actually approached by both Brenda and Crystal and asked if he could help them in committing a murder. He claimed that the three of them went back to his apartment to discuss different methods before ultimately choosing to shoot Kendra with a gun because that would be the quickest method. He claimed that some of the other methods they discussed were by lethal injection or to kidnap Kendra. However, again, they ended up going with shooting her instead. Now, you might be sitting there wondering, why would Christopher get himself involved in this? What comes out of it for him? What does he get in exchange for this? And to that, I can tell you that according to Christopher, he claimed that Brenda promised him an unlimited supply of drugs at his disposal whenever he wanted. So basically a lifetime supply of drugs. And Christopher thought that by having this, it would make him one of the biggest drug dealers in the Dallas area. And to him, he saw dollar signs. So that was something that was very enticing for him. And that is why he agreed to go through with it. Now, when it came to Christopher's trial, he pled not guilty. However, ultimately, he was found guilty and sentenced to death after denying a plea deal, which would have made him testify against Brenda. So he chose not to testify against Brenda, and he got the death penalty for it. Now, Crystal, on the other hand, Crystal actually took a plea. She pled guilty and was sentenced to 35 years, and she had to testify against both Christopher and Brenda, which she did. Now, Crystal really was the key component here because once she was arrested, she was very willing to give up any and all information in regards to the case. She claimed that she just wanted to help find justice for Kendra at this point, and she wanted to hold both Brenda and Christopher equally responsible because they were also involved in this. Now, whether you believe that or not, it didn't really matter because police and the prosecution really used this to their advantage to get Crystal to give up the information in regards to both Christopher and Brenda. Now, after Christopher was found guilty and sentenced to death, all that was really left was for police to find Brenda. And luckily enough, 6 months after she fled the country, they did. Police tracked down Brenda in Mexico, and she was extradited back to the United States. Now, once she got back to the United States, Brenda pled not guilty. So now it was time for Brenda's trial. Now, leading up to the trial, there were several new things that police had learned through their investigation about how twisted and sinister Brenda really was. Now, when police looked into Brenda's phone, they went through the photos and they saw dozens and dozens of pictures of Ricky, dozens of pictures of Kendra, and dozens of pictures of them together. They also saw that Brenda had a picture of Ricky's social security card, but it did not end there. Police learned that Brenda had access to Ricky's iCloud. So she had the login for the iCloud, and in turn, that gave her access to everything about Ricky. It gave her access to his messages, his text messages, his phone calls, his emails, all of it. And Brenda was checking these text messages religiously. She was seeing what Ricky was texting to other people, what other people were saying to Ricky, and that is how she ultimately found out about his and Kendra's relationship. She also learned through having his email that Ricky had planned a trip for him and Kendra to go to Cancun. Now, this trip was set for September 3rd, 2015, the day after the murder. Now, because Brenda had all of this information, she was also able to learn that after this trip to Cancun, Kendra and Ricky were planning on moving to San Francisco together, and it was also learned that Brenda had a copy of Ricky's house key. So this was some of the information that police learned before going into trial and that the prosecution used in the trial, and it really painted this picture that Brenda was stalking, cyber stalking, both Ricky and Kendra as well. So now with all of this information, we go to Brenda's trial, and there were many people who took the stand against her, including her old roommate and her own cousin. Both of them individually took the stand and claimed that on different occasions, Brenda had asked them to help her carry out the murder, which they refused to do. So now everyone's learning that Brenda had been shopping around, trying to find anyone who would kill Kendra for her. But according to the two of them, it wasn't just that. It didn't just stop at Kendra, because she also asked them to beat Ricky until he was in a coma. Now, police also found a video on Brenda's phone of her having a conversation with Crystal about getting a silencer for a handgun similar to the gun that was used to kill Kendra. And again, that was played during the trial as well. Now, at this point, Ricky takes the stand. And obviously this was a very, very big deal in this trial because he was the connection between Brenda and Kendra. This was the love triangle. He was the person in the middle of all of this. And when he took the stand, Ricky explains that leading up to the murder, Brenda was exhibiting very obsessive and stalking behavior. She showed up on the running path that Ricky would be on while he was taking his runs. He claimed that he would be running in one direction and Brenda would be running past him in the opposite direction. He claimed that she also followed him to his salsa lessons. I guess he took salsa lessons, and Brenda would just show up at these lessons. And at the time, Ricky claims that he just figured it was an odd coincidence. He didn't think that he was being followed or that Brenda was stalking him. The two did have a platonic relationship. Again, as I said in the beginning, Ricky claimed that their breakup was amicable and that they were able to have, they were able to be on good terms at the very least. So from Ricky's end, things just seem to be like ironic coincidences that he was running in to Brenda. Again, they live in the same city, and he thought it's not the most outlandish thing to think that they would run into each other, but little did he know, Brenda's plans were much more sinister. Now, Ricky even said that Brenda had reached out to him several days following Kendra's murder to give him her support. Now, Brenda's friends also took the stand and claimed that after the breakup occurred, Brenda was hyperfixated on Ricky, and when Ricky moved on to be with Kendra, Brenda could not accept it. It was not something that she was able to get past. All she could talk about was Ricky and Kendra. All she could think about was Ricky and Kendra. She would say things about how she wanted someone to eliminate Kendra or harm Ricky. So that is what her friends were saying. And Crystal also took the stand during Brenda's trial. Again, this was a part of her plea deal. So she took the stand against Brenda, and she claimed that Brenda was the one who orchestrated this whole plan, and how Brenda's motivation to kill Kendra was because she was envious over the fact that Kendra was dating Ricky. Now, Crystal also claimed that Brenda offered her $500 for this murder, and she claimed that she was struggling at the time. She had a son, and $500 was a lot to her, and she wanted to be able to have that money, so that is why she agreed to do it at the time. Now, Crystal also claimed that her and Brenda spent time leading up to the murder following Kendra. She claimed that they would follow her around in their car, trying to see what her daily routine was. That way they could tee up for the most seamless execution. Crystal also claimed that on the day prior to the murder, that the three of them, Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher, did what they called a dry run. So they went from Kendra's workplace back to her apartment just to kind of get an idea of what the timing would be, so that way everything could go, again, very seamlessly. According to Crystal, she said that Brenda also stole a separate license plate off of a different car to put on the Jeep Cherokee. That way it would not be detected. So that was something that Brenda did leading up to the murder as well. And when it comes to the day of the murder, Crystal said that evening she dropped Brenda off at the Chili's and then went to go pick up Christopher at his apartment. She claimed he picked her up and he got into the backseat of the car and was cleaning the gun while driving over to Kendra's apartment complex. She claimed that once they pulled in, again, they went into the resident parking lot, and once Kendra pulled in to that same lot, Crystal claimed that Christopher got out of the car, went over to Kendra, and while Crystal claims that she didn't actually see Christopher physically shooting Kendra, she did hear the gunshots, and after the gunshots, she claimed that she backed out of the parking spot, Christopher got back into the car, and that the two of them drove to an abandoned house to clean the Jeep and the gun before returning the car back to Jose. Crystal claimed that they stole Kendra's purse in order to make this look like a robbery gone wrong. However, clearly, as we know, that was not the case. Now, as far as the defense goes, they argued that there was really no evidence to prove that this agreement between Crystal and Brenda and Christopher ever existed. They argued that this agreement was never in writing, there was never any contract, it's very circumstantial, and they also tried to say that Crystal and Christopher did this out of their own free will because Brenda did not have a motive, but the jury did not believe them, and after deliberation, the jury came back and concluded that Brenda was found guilty of the murder of Kendra Hatcher, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And if you're sitting here wondering, why did Christopher get the death penalty and why did Brenda not get the death penalty, it turns out Brenda fleeing to Mexico really did save her life in that regard, because there is some sort of agreement where if a suspect flees to Mexico and then they get extradited back to America, they cannot be sentenced to death. I know. I thought the same thing, but that is why Brenda did not receive the death penalty, and that is why she is getting a life sentence without the possibility of parole. So Christopher got a life sentence, Brenda got life in murder without parole, and Crystal got 35 years for the murder of Kendra Hatcher. And I'm very interested to hear what you guys think about those sentences. Do you think it's too much? Do you think it's too little? Who do you think should have got the longest sentence? I mean, regardless of anything, this is all a very tragic case, and this was all the result of someone who wasn't able to let go, someone who grew an obsession, someone who was cyber stalking, someone who became so infatuated with another person that they could not accept the fact that that person did not want them anymore, and it unfortunately led to the death of Kendra Hatcher, who really did not do anything wrong. She was just dating a new guy, falling in love, and it led to her murder. And so that, you guys, guys is the case of Kendra Hatcher. I'm very interested to hear what you guys have to say about it. Please let me know in the comments below. And with that being said, you guys, that is all for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Killer Instinct. Again, if you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah and I'm your host of Killer Instinct. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly every single Wednesday. You're not going to want to miss it. I will be back next week with a brand new one. And until then, stay safe. Bye, guys.